What is it about hospitals at night that sends chills down your spine? Is it the dimly lit hallways, the echo of distant footsteps, or the weight of lives saved and lost? Night shifts in a hospital are supposed to be quiet, a time for the living to rest and recover. But what happens when the quiet is broken by something that isn't supposed to be there? Working the night shift at an old hospital can feel like stepping into another world. The sterile walls and bright overhead lights seem to take on a different character when the sun goes down, shifting from clinical and busy to eerie and foreboding. It's a time when silence grows heavy and shadows seem to stretch longer than they should. When I first started working nights, I chalked up the strange feelings to exhaustion or imagination. But it didn't take long before I began to realize that something else lingered in those halls, something unseen but undeniably present. These are the experiences that still haunt me, long after I've left that hospital. It started small, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision, a faint sound of footsteps when no one else was around. I convinced myself it was my mind playing tricks on me. But the unease grew stronger with each passing shift. One night, I was walking through the East Wing to check on a patient. The hallway stretched long and empty, illuminated only by the flickering glow of outdated fluorescent lights. As I approached the last room on the left, I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned quickly, expecting to see a colleague or patient who had wandered out of bed, but the hallway was empty. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow, tall and human-shaped, slipping silently into one of the empty rooms. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I forced myself to walk to the door, peering inside. The room was dark and empty, just like the others on that wing. But the air inside was icy cold, and a faint metallic smell lingered, like blood. I left quickly, my heart racing. It was the first time I truly believed something beyond the ordinary was happening in that hospital. After that night, I couldn't shake the sense that I was no longer alone during my shifts. The feeling followed me everywhere, even into the elevator. The hospital's main elevator was old and prone to breaking down. On some nights, it seemed to have a mind of its own. One particular night, I was heading to the basement to grab supplies from storage. As the elevator doors closed, I felt a strange chill creep over me. The ride down was unusually slow, the old machinery groaning and shuddering. Then, without warning, the elevator stopped on the second floor, a floor that had been closed off for years. The doors slid open, revealing a pitch-black hallway. I froze, staring into the darkness. That's when I heard it. Soft humming, like a lullaby, echoing from somewhere deep within the empty wing. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by a faint shuffle of footsteps. I hit the close doors button repeatedly, my hands shaking. Just as the doors began to close, a shadowy figure appeared at the end of the hallway, motionless and watching. The elevator finally moved, and I didn't go back to the basement that night. The ICU was the most unsettling part of the hospital. It wasn't just the nature of the patients there, the life and death stakes that hung in the air. It was something else, something darker. The other nurses often whispered about an apparition, a figure dressed in outdated hospital attire that wandered the ICU at night. I laughed it off as a ghost story meant to pass the time. But then I saw it. It was around 3 a.m., the infamous witching hour, when the hospital seemed to fall into an unnatural stillness. I was charting at the nurses' station when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A man, dressed in an old-fashioned white coat, was walking slowly down the hall. His gait was deliberate, his head slightly bowed. "Doctor?" I called out, surprised. The hospital didn't have any male doctors working the night shift that evening. The figure stopped abruptly, turning its head toward me. That's when I realized something was terribly wrong. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, deep, empty sockets, seemed to bore into me. Before I could move or speak, he disappeared, fading into the dim light of the hallway. I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, unable to process what I had just seen. The most terrifying experience of all happened during one of my last shifts at the hospital. It was a quiet night, the kind that always made me uneasy. Around 3:30 a.m., the code blue alarm sounded. A cardiac arrest in room 214. I grabbed the crash cart and rushed to the room, my adrenaline spiking. But when I got there, the room was empty. No patient, no bed, nothing. I stood there confused, until the alarm stopped abruptly. Then it started again, this time for room 305, the same room where I had seen the shadow weeks earlier. I hesitated, dread pooling in my stomach. With the crash cart still in tow, I made my way to the room. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, a wave of freezing air hit me. The room was pitch black, except for the faint glow of the heart monitor, which showed a flatline despite there being no patient in the bed. Suddenly, the monitor began to beep erratically, the lines on the screen spiking as if registering a heartbeat. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The door slammed shut behind me, and the monitor went silent. In the oppressive darkness, I heard a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." I ran, abandoning the crash cart and not stopping until I reached the nurses' station. I left that hospital shortly after. The experiences I had during those nights still haunt me, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Hospitals are places of healing, but they are also places of loss, where emotions run high and energy lingers. Maybe that's why they seem to attract the unexplainable. If you ever find yourself working the night shift in an old hospital, remember this: not every shadow is just a shadow, and not every alarm is for the living.